The problem with declaring an entire category of creatures extinct, as Dr. Kethavar would soon discover, is that extinction requires a certain degree of cooperation from the allegedly deceased parties. But at precisely 1430 Standard Galactic Time, on what would later be remembered as the day academic hubris died, Dr. Kethavar stood before the assembled xenobiology elite of 17 different species, his crystalline head spines gleaming with the confidence that only comes from having 3 advanced degrees and absolutely no field experience. "Esteemed colleagues," Kethavar began, his translator rendering his natural Altarian harmonic frequencies into something resembling pompous satisfaction. "Today we publish our definitive findings on the complete extinction of Class 7 mythological apex predators across all known galactic sectors. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story." The Nexus Archive's grand amphitheater buzzed with the kind of intellectual excitement that only xenobiologists could muster for declaring things officially dead. Representatives from the hegemony's finest universities had gathered for this moment. The formal closing of the books on creatures that had never existed in the first place, according to proper scientific consensus. Dr. Velnara, whose Zilithian chitinous exterior clicked approvingly, leaned into her microphone. The data correlation across 847 surveyed species is indeed conclusive. No verifiable specimens, no fossil evidence meeting peer review standards, and certainly no contemporary sightings that survived proper academic scrutiny. "Precisely," Kethavar continued, advancing his holographic presentation to display cross-referenced mythology charts. "Take the human obsession with so-called dragons. 17 distinct cultural variants across their single planet, each claiming these creatures possessed impossible physiological characteristics, flight-capable reptilian megafauna with internal combustion-based breath weaponry and supernatural longevity. The mathematical improbabilities alone render such creatures biologically absurd." A ripple of scholarly chuckling passed through the amphitheater. The Nexus Archive prided itself on being the galaxy's most rigorous scientific institution. And humans were endearingly primitive in their mythological thinking. Dr. Thalrix, a Vorthak whose tentacled head writhed with what passed for academic curiosity among his species, raised a question. What of the human insistence that these creatures possessed intelligence equivalent to or exceeding their own? Surely this represents the height of their anthropocentric delusions? "An excellent observation," Kethavar replied, warming to his favorite topic. "Human mythology consistently attributes advanced cognitive abilities to their imaginary megafauna. Dragons, phoenixes, thunderbirds, all supposedly capable of complex reasoning, advanced communication, and in some variants, what they term magic. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of evolutionary pressure dynamics. Professor Quintal, the lone human representative and the only being present who looked increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. With respect, colleagues, perhaps we should consider that human folklore preservation methods have proven remarkably accurate regarding other historical... Dr. Velnara's chitinous plates rattled with what served as Zilithian laughter. "Professor Quintal, your species has documented histories spanning fewer than 6,000 cycles. The Altarians have maintained scientific records for over 40,000 cycles, the Zilithians for 60. If creatures matching these dragon profiles had existed within any reasonable time frame, our archaeological surveys would have detected them." Quintal shifted uncomfortably in his chair, designed for beings with more conventional skeletal structures. "I merely suggest that dismissing entire categories of human cultural knowledge might be premature," Kethavar's head spines practically vibrated with condescension. "Professor, we've conducted exhaustive surveys of 1,247 planetary systems. We've cataloged genetic material from 400,000 distinct species. We've examined fossil records spanning 8 million cycles of evolutionary development. The absence of evidence at this scale constitutes conclusive proof of absence." "But surely," Quintal pressed, "the consistency of dragon descriptions across isolated human cultures suggests—" "It suggests," interrupted Dr. Yithgol, a Nexari whose 6 eyes blinked in synchronized disdain, "that your species has a remarkably persistent neurological tendency toward fantasy construction. The Nexari have studied this phenomenon extensively. Humans consistently project supernatural attributes onto apex predators as a psychological coping mechanism for their own biological inadequacies." The assembled academics murmured appreciatively. Dr. Yithgol's research into human psychological inadequacies had become a minor academic sensation. Professor Quintal made one final attempt. "What about the mathematical precision in human dragon descriptions? Wing-to-body ratios, flame generation mechanics, flight dynamics? These aren't random fantasies. They represent sophisticated engineering concepts that humans shouldn't have been capable of developing independently." "Which," Dr. Kethavar replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow student, "merely demonstrates that human imagination occasionally stumbles into mathematical coherence through pure statistical probability. Even random number generators occasionally produce seemingly meaningful patterns." The academic laughter that followed this observation was interrupted by something unprecedented in the Nexus Archive's 800-year history: the emergency alert system activating during a xenobiology conference. Emergency Coordinator Zextal, a hegemony administrative officer whose species had evolved past the need for individual names, materialized as a holographic projection above the conference table. His normally steady demeanor showed what could charitably be called concern. "Dr. Kethavar," Zextal's voice carried the flat efficiency that hegemony bureaucrats used when reality had become inconveniently complicated. "We're receiving reports from Kepler Station of a Category 9 unidentified phenomenon requiring immediate academic consultation." Every being in the amphitheater understood that Category 9 phenomena were reserved for events that violated known physics. They happened perhaps once per century and usually involved situations like star spontaneously changing color or planet achieving sentience. "What type of phenomenon?" Dr. Velnara asked, her chitinous exterior now clicking with nervous energy rather than academic satisfaction. Zextal's holographic form flickered, always a sign of severe bureaucratic distress. According to Kepler Station sensors, a creature measuring approximately 200 meters in length, exhibiting flight capabilities, reptilian morphology, and internal thermal generation signatures consistent with combustion-based breath weaponry. The silence that followed contained approximately 14 different species' worth of sudden intellectual discomfort. "Impossible," Dr. Kethavar said, though his head spines had stopped their confident gleaming. "Sensor malfunction, equipment failure, mass hallucination. Kepler Station has run full diagnostic protocols 3 times, Zextal continued with the relentless efficiency of someone delivering bad news to people who really didn't want to hear it. All systems nominal, all readings confirmed. Visual confirmation from 17 independent observation platforms. Dr. Yithgol's 6 eyes now blinked in complete asynchronization, a sign of severe Nexari cognitive distress. What about the human psychological projection theory? Perhaps Kepler Station's crew is experiencing collective... Kepler Station is operated entirely by hegemony personnel, Zextal interrupted, No humans on station. No human psychological influences. No human anything, actually, which makes the next part of this report particularly interesting. Professor Quintal, who had spent the last hour being academically demolished, now wore the expression of someone watching his colleagues receive a comprehensive reality adjustment. What next part? Zextal's hologram flickered again. The creature is not alone. Long-range scans detect a humanoid figure, approximately 1.7 meters in height, riding what can only be described as a saddle mounted between the creature's wing joints. The amphitheater fell so quiet that the building's atmospheric recycling systems suddenly sounded thunderous. Furthermore, Zextal continued, apparently determined to thoroughly destroy 17 careers in xenobiology. Preliminary communication intercepts suggest the rider is broadcasting in standard Terran dialect frequencies. Current trajectory indicates the creature is heading directly toward hegemony core systems at approximately 1/4 light speed. Dr. Kethavar's head spines had gone completely dim. This is impossible. Yes, Zextal agreed with devastating bureaucratic precision. That appears to be the general consensus. However, impossible things occasionally have the discourtesy to occur anyway. The Hegemony Council requires immediate expert analysis of this situation. Dr. Velnara's chitinous clicking had accelerated to what sounded like a typewriter operated by someone having a seizure. What immediate analysis? We just spent 6 months proving these creatures never existed. Which, Professor Quintal observed with the gentle satisfaction of someone whose academic reputation had just been posthumously vindicated, suggests we might want to reconsider some of our fundamental assumptions about human cultural preservation methods. The holographic coordinator's expression managed to convey both official sympathy and complete bureaucratic exhaustion. The Hegemony Council has requested that this conference immediately redirect its focus from proving dragon extinction to explaining dragon existence. Effective immediately, your research funding has been transferred to the Department of Crisis Management and Mythological Accuracy. Mythological accuracy? Dr. Yeathgoal's 6 eyes had given up blinking entirely. That's not even a real academic discipline. It is now, Zextal replied. Congratulations on your career transitions. Please report to Emergency Research Division 7 within the hour. And Professor Quintal. The human looked up, still processing his sudden elevation from academic laughingstock to the only expert on apparently real mythological creatures. The Hegemony Council specifically requests your immediate consultation on human folklore accuracy rates. They're particularly interested in your species' documentation regarding phoenixes, thunderbirds, and something called a kraken. As Zextal's hologram vanished, leaving 17 xenobiology experts staring at the smoldering remains of their careers, Professor Quintal couldn't help but wonder if perhaps his grandmother's stories about the old country had been more documentary than anyone realized. After all, she'd always insisted that the family had once served as dragon keepers. But that was ridiculous, wasn't it? Captain Yexta had commanded the GSV Rational Discourse for 12 years without encountering a single situation that couldn't be resolved through proper application of hegemony standard operating procedures. Her species, the methodical collective, had evolved past individual creativity specifically to avoid the kind of administrative chaos that irregular situations tended to produce. Unfortunately, irregular situations had apparently evolved right back. "Sensor Technician Mordek," she said, her voice carrying the flat precision that made hegemony officers. "Excellent at managing crises and terrible at parties. Please explain to me why our long-range detection array is reporting readings that violate approximately 14 different laws of physics." Mordek, a young Catherian whose natural curiosity had survived 3 years of military discipline, hunched over his console with the dedicated focus of someone trying to make impossible data conform to reality through sheer technological stubbornness. Captain, I've recalibrated the sensors 6 times. The readings remain consistent. Consistent with what, exactly? Well, Mordek's antennae twitched nervously. Consistent with a biological entity measuring 180 to 220 meters in length, exhibiting sustained atmospheric flight capabilities without visible propulsion systems, maintaining core body temperature of approximately 2,000 degrees Kelvin, and generating localized gravitational anomalies consistent with mass displacement of roughly 400 standard tons. Chief Science Officer Pelandra, a Thexian whose normally blue-tinted skin had shifted to an alarming shade of purple, looked up from her own readouts. Those specifications don't match any known atmospheric flight physics. Nothing biological achieves sustained flight at that mass ratio without mechanical assistance. Perhaps, suggested communications specialist Zorthul, with the helpful optimism of someone who hadn't yet grasped the full scope of the problem, the creature is mechanical? Some kind of advanced bioengineered construct? Captain Yexta appreciated subordinates who offered rational explanations, even when those explanations were demonstrably wrong. Mordek, do your readings indicate mechanical components? No, Captain. The biological signatures are comprehensive. Cardiovascular system, respiratory patterns, neural activity, digestive processes. This thing is definitely alive, definitely organic, and definitely shouldn't exist. Zorthul, the captain continued, maintaining her bureaucratic calm through sheer force of habit. What are the communications from Kepler Station reporting? Zorthul's tentacles rippled through his translator interface with practiced efficiency. Station Commander Vex Hari is agitated, Captain. Her exact words were, "Something the size of a heavy cruiser just flew past our observation deck, and it was definitely breathing." Breathing implies respiratory function, Chief Pelandra observed with scientific detachment. Respiratory function in a 400-ton atmospheric flight-capable organism implies metabolic requirements that would necessitate consuming roughly 40,000 kilograms of organic matter per day. What could possibly sustain such caloric demands? Well, Mordek said slowly, checking his readings again. According to spectrographic analysis, it appears to be hunting. Every being on the bridge turned to stare at the sensor technician. Hunting what? Captain Yexta asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Vorthak cargo. Freighters, apparently. 3 ships have reported near-miss encounters in the last 2 hours. The creature appears to be investigating them. Chief Science Officer Pelandra's skin had now shifted to a deep violet that indicated severe Thexian intellectual distress. Captain, if this entity is actively engaging with spacefaring vessels, we need to consider territorial behavior patterns. Large predators don't typically hunt unless they're protecting something. Or someone, communications specialist Zorthul added unhelpfully. Captain Yexta had survived her military career by treating impossible situations as elaborate administrative challenges. Zorthul, have we established communication with this entity? That's complicated, Captain. Yexta waited. In her experience, complicated usually meant someone was about to make her day significantly worse. We're receiving transmissions from the creature's general location, Zorthul continued, but they're not coming from the creature itself. Someone appears to be riding it. Riding it? Yes, Captain. Someone is riding a 200-meter biological impossibility through interstellar space. That appears to be accurate, Captain. Captain Yexta had been trained to handle first contact scenarios, military engagements, diplomatic crises, and mechanical failures. Somehow, her instructors had failed to cover mythological creature cavalry. What species? Zorthul checked his readings twice before responding. Human, Captain. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and Chief Pelandra's increasingly frantic note-taking. A human, Captain Yexta repeated slowly, is riding an extinct creature through space. The creature doesn't appear to be extinct, Captain. No, Mordek, I gathered that. Should I hail them, Captain? Zorthul asked. Captain Yexta considered her options. Hegemony First Contact protocols covered approximately 847 different scenarios, including aggressive silicon-based swarm entities and gaseous collective intelligences with territorial disputes. Somehow the protocol writers had overlooked human-riding mythological creature, possibly armed. Open a channel, she decided. Standard diplomatic frequencies. Channel open, Captain. Unidentified biological entity, this is Captain Yexta of the Hegemony Vessel Rational Discourse. Please identify yourself and state your intentions in this sector. The response came immediately, transmitted in flawless standard galactic with what sounded like barely contained amusement. Rational Discourse, this is Commander Riley Chen, formerly of the Terra Defense Corps, currently of wherever the hell I want to be. As for intentions, we're heading to Centaurus Prime for a little conversation with your council about some recent academic papers that have been circulating. Chief Pelandra looked up from her frantic calculations. Captain, Chen is a human surname, but Terra Defense Corps' records show no active personnel by that designation. Chen, Captain Yexta continued, our records indicate no current Terra Defense Corps personnel matching your identification. That's because I've been off the books for 3 years, came the reply. Turns out the galaxy is a lot more interesting when you stop listening to bureaucrats tell you what's possible. Chen, please clarify your current vessel classification for our records. The pause that followed lasted exactly long enough for Captain Yexta to realize she'd asked a profoundly stupid question. Captain? Chen's voice carried the kind of patient amusement usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to children. I'm riding a dragon. Her name is Ashkor. She's approximately 800 years old. She's been watching your little academic conference with considerable interest, and she has some opinions about being declared extinct. Mordek's console started beeping frantically. Captain, I'm detecting massive electromagnetic fluctuations around the entity. Energy signatures are spiking beyond measurement parameters. Chen, Captain Yexta said carefully, is your companion experiencing distress? Oh no, Captain. She's just laughing. The electromagnetic reading suggested that dragon laughter registered somewhere between a solar flare and a gravitational anomaly. Chen, Chief Pelandra interjected, abandoning all pretense of scientific objectivity. How is sustained spaceflight possible for an atmospheric-dependent organism? Well, Doc, that's where things get interesting. See, dragons don't actually breathe air. They process stellar radiation directly through specialized organ clusters that your people have never bothered to look for because you were too busy proving they don't exist. Captain Yexta felt the universe shift slightly, as if reality itself had decided to file a complaint against academic certainty. Chen, she said, what exactly do you want? Just a friendly chat with whoever decided to publish that paper about mythological creature extinction. Ashkor found it deeply offensive. Apparently, being declared academically impossible is considered quite rude in dragon culture. The comm channel crackled with what sounded distinctly like massive wings adjusting flight position. Oh, and Captain? You might want to alert Centaurus Defense Command that we're incoming. Ashkor gets cranky when people point weapons at her, and cranky dragons tend to express their feelings through interpretive orbital bombardment. As the transmission ended, Captain Yexta stared at her crew of utterly bewildered xenobiology experts and military personnel. Mordek, she said finally, set course for Centaurus Prime, maximum speed. Should I alert Fleet Command, Captain? Oh yes. Tell them we have a situation that's about to make their day significantly more complicated." "What should I tell them the situation is, Captain?" Captain Yexta considered her options. She could try to explain that mythology had become foreign policy, that academic conferences were now military briefings, and that a human was riding an extinction-defying creature toward the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. "Tell them," she said, "that we need to update some textbooks." Fleet Admiral Khordun had earned his position through 43 years of tactical excellence, strategic brilliance, and an impressive ability to remain calm when lesser officers started screaming about incoming threats. His scarred carapace bore the markings of 17 different campaigns, and his 4 mechanical arm replacements testified to his hands-on leadership philosophy, none of which had prepared him for conducting diplomacy with a creature that predated galactic civilization by several thousand years and had apparently been taking notes. The Centaurus defense grid represented the pinnacle of hegemony military engineering. 400 automated defense platforms, 60 heavy cruisers, 12 dreadnought-class vessels, and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. The Admiral surveyed this impressive display of technological superiority from the bridge of the inexorable logic and wondered why he felt like he was bringing a pointed stick to negotiate with a supernova. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Vexchi reported, her Canthari vocal sacs trembling with barely controlled anxiety. "The entity has entered outer defensive perimeter. All platforms are tracking target, but..." "But what, Commander?" "Sir, the targeting computers keep classifying it as a historical documentary rather than a tactical threat." Admiral Khordun had dealt with malfunctioning military hardware before, but this particular malfunction seemed personally offensive. "Explain." "The ship's AI keeps cross-referencing the entity's profile against mythological databases and returning error messages like target classification, extinct, and threat assessment, undefined, consult folklore archives." "Have you tried turning the targeting computers off and back on again?" 17 times, sir. The problem appears to be that our military databases don't contain threat assessment parameters for creatures that officially don't exist. Admiral Khordun made a mental note to have someone court-martialed for this oversight, assuming anyone survived the next few hours to sign the paperwork. "Sir," Tactical Officer Javal interrupted, his usual Nexari composure cracked like eggshell. "We're receiving a direct transmission, audio and visual." On screen. The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that would haunt Admiral Khordun's dreams for the remainder of his unnaturally extended lifespan. A human female, wearing what appeared to be modified Terra Defense Corps armor, sat casually astride a creature that the Admiral's mind insisted on classifying as impossible, despite the evidence of his own eyes. The dragon's scales shifted between deep emerald and molten gold, its wingspan easily dwarfing the Admiral's flagship. But it was the creature's eyes that made the Admiral's tactical instincts scream warnings, ancient, intelligent, and deeply, profoundly annoyed. "Greetings, Fleet Admiral Khordun," the human said, apparently having access to his personal identification codes, despite traveling on a creature that shouldn't exist. "I'm Commander Chen, and this is Ashkor. We're here for that conversation I mentioned." Admiral Khordun had conducted diplomatic negotiations with 23 different species. He understood hegemony protocol, Zilithian honor codes, Altarian bureaucratic rituals, and even the bewildering social hierarchies of the collective. None of his training covered appropriate etiquette for addressing legendary creatures. "Commander Chen," he began carefully, "welcome to Centaurus Defense Zone. May I ask the nature of your diplomatic mission?" "Oh, it's simple, Admiral. Ashkor would like to discuss some recent academic publications with their authors, particularly the paper declaring her species extinct." The dragon's massive head turned slightly, and Admiral Khordun found himself on the receiving end of a stare that seemed to catalog his every weakness, tactical error, and questionable life choice. When the creature spoke, its voice bypassed the comm system entirely and resonated directly in every mind on the bridge. The small ones believe themselves qualified to determine what exists and what does not. The mental voice carried amusement that felt roughly equivalent to being laughed at by a natural disaster. This assumption demonstrates a fascinating misunderstanding of their position in the cosmic hierarchy. Lieutenant Commander Vexchi's vocal sacs had inflated to roughly twice their normal size, a Kanthari stress response usually reserved for imminent death scenarios. "Sir, should we consider this a hostile action?" Hostile? Ashkor's mental laughter felt like standing next to a controlled fusion explosion. "Little warrior, your entire defense grid possesses roughly the same offensive capability as an enthusiastic sneeze. Why would I consider you hostile?" Admiral Khordun realized he was experiencing the unique humiliation of being militarily dismissed by a creature that academics had spent the morning proving couldn't exist. "Ashkor," he said, testing the name carefully, "what exactly do you wish to discuss with our academic institutions?" Academic institutions. The dragon's mental voice carried the particular disdain that came from watching inferior minds congratulate themselves on their ignorance. "Your scholars declare my kind extinct, while we watch their little ships pollute our migration routes. They catalog our sacred nesting grounds as mineral-rich asteroid fields suitable for mining operations. They publish papers about our impossibility, while we observe their meetings from distances they cannot detect." Commander Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression carrying the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent 3 years learning that the galaxy's understanding of reality was charmingly incomplete. "What Ashkor is trying to say, Admiral, is that dragons never went extinct. They just got tired of dealing with galactic bureaucracy." "You've been watching us?" Admiral Khordun asked. "Watching. Listening. Occasionally preventing your more ambitious military campaigns from accidentally destroying worlds we consider important." Ashkor's mental voice carried casual menace, like background radiation. "Did you truly believe those 17 equipment failures during the Nexari expansion wars were coincidental?" Tactical Officer Javal's 6 eyes widened simultaneously. "Sir, those equipment failures saved approximately 40 million civilian lives by preventing planetary bombardment campaigns." "You've been interfering with hegemony military operations?" Admiral Khordun asked, his tactical mind racing through the implications. "Interfering implies you had legitimate authority to conduct those operations in the first place." The dragon's amusement felt like standing in the path of a controlled avalanche. "We merely corrected some paperwork errors in your target selection processes." Commander Chen's grin widened. "Turns out dragons have very strong opinions about military ethics. Who knew?" "How many of you are there?" Lieutenant Commander Vexchi whispered. "Enough," Ashkor replied with finality that suggested the conversation had reached topics not open for discussion. "The relevant question is not our numbers, but rather why your species consistently assume that failing to detect something constitutes proof of its non-existence." Admiral Khordun felt his 43 years of military experience recalibrating themselves in real time. "What do you want from us?" "Simple," Commander Chen said. "Ashkor wants to attend the next Nexus Archive Xenobiology Conference. She's particularly interested in delivering a guest lecture on advanced probability theory and the statistical likelihood of academic embarrassment." Also, Ashkor added with mental overtones that suggested barely restrained violence, "We require your scholars to stop designating our nesting worlds as suitable for terraforming projects. Some of us have been raising clutches on those worlds for longer than your civilization has possessed fire." "Nesting worlds," Admiral Kordun repeated slowly. You're saying dragons are still actively reproducing. Were you under the impression that extinction involved continued biological functions? Ashkor's mental voice carried the patient condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to particularly slow students. Your academics appear confused about fundamental biological terminology. Commander Chen checked some kind of wrist display. Admiral, we need to wrap this up. Ashkor has a meeting with the Hegemony Council in 4 hours, and she gets cranky when she's late. What kind of meeting? The kind where she explains exactly which star systems she and her relatives have been protecting, which ones they've been preventing you from accidentally destroying, and which ones they're prepared to defend if your expansion policies don't start including environmental impact assessments. Admiral Kordun realized he was witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of diplomacy. Interspecies relations where one species was mythological, several thousand years older than galactic civilization, and possessed the individual firepower of a small fleet. Commander Chen, he said carefully, hypothetically speaking, what would constitute acceptable diplomatic relations with your companion's people? Simple, Ashkor replied. Stop assuming you understand the galaxy better than the beings who were here first. Start asking permission before you rearrange star systems, and perhaps consider that human folklore might contain useful information about creatures you haven't bothered to notice. Is that negotiable? Commander Chen's laugh contained 3 years' worth of perspective that the rest of the galaxy was apparently about to acquire the hard way. Admiral, you've been sharing the galaxy with apex predators who can travel faster than light, survive in deep space, and possess individual intelligence that makes your best AI systems look like pocket calculators. The question isn't whether it's negotiable. She paused, patting Ashkor's neck with casual affection. The question is whether you'd prefer to learn diplomatic courtesy before or after they decide to stop being polite about your ignorance. Admiral Kordun looked at his tactical displays, his defense grids, his 400 platforms of concentrated firepower, and realized that every weapon in the Centauri system was effectively a strongly worded letter addressed to a creature that could probably eat planets if it got sufficiently motivated. Commander Chen, he said, would you be available to serve as a cultural liaison for future diplomatic endeavors? That depends, Admiral. Do you have any more academic papers declaring extinct creatures that might want to file complaints? Admiral Kordun checked his personal database and discovered that humans had folklore regarding approximately 847 different mythological species. Commander, he said quietly, I think we're going to need a bigger diplomatic corps. 6 months later, Junior Research Associate Tickwell discovered that the universe possessed a sense of humor roughly as subtle as a collapsing star. The Nexus Archive had undergone what administrators euphemistically called structural reorganization, though most staff preferred the more accurate term, complete existential meltdown. The Department of Xenobiology had been divided into confirmed species and species we thought we'd successfully eliminated through academic smugness. The latter department occupied 17 floors and growing. Tickwell, a recently graduated Quellian whose natural optimism hadn't yet been crushed by institutional reality, worked in the newly established Office of Folkloric Verification. Her current assignment involved cross-referencing human cultural databases against galactic survey records, a task that had initially seemed routine. It was turning out to be anything but. Senior Associate Yithmel, she called across the research bay, I'm finding some concerning patterns in the Terra Cultural Archive. Yithmel, formerly Dr. Yithgol, until his theories about human psychological inadequacies had become professionally embarrassing, looked up from his own terminal with the haunted expression of someone whose entire career had been retroactively invalidated. What kind of patterns, Tickwell? Well, humans appear to have accurate folklore regarding the singing crystals of Altair 7. The what? You know those mineral formations that generate harmonic frequencies? The ones we discovered last month during routine geological surveys? Humans call them crystal caves that sing to lost travelers. Their folklore dates back approximately 3,000 years. Ythmel's natural blue coloration had started shifting toward the gray that indicated Nexari cognitive overload. Tickwell, humans achieved interstellar flight 127 years ago. They had no contact with Altarian systems 3,000 years ago. I know, sir. That's why I flagged it. What else have you found? Tickwell consulted her growing list with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't yet learned that discovering impossible things led to administrative headaches rather than academic glory. Phoenixes match the regenerative cycle patterns of the eternal flamebirds we found nesting in the Magellanic corona. Thunderbirds correspond exactly with the electromagnetic manipulation capabilities of those atmospheric predators on Stormbringer Prime. Unicorns appear to be accurate descriptions of the healing enzyme-secreting equines we catalogued in the Verdant Spiral last week. Senior Associate Ythmel sat down heavily, his forearms supporting his increasingly heavy head. How many folklore matches have you confirmed? So far? 47 species. But sir, I'm only 3 weeks into the project. 47. Yes, sir, and that's just from a preliminary survey of major human cultural groups. I haven't even started on their regional folklore variations. The implications hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. If human folklore was systematically accurate about creatures the galaxy had spent centuries failing to notice, then either humans possessed impossible cultural preservation abilities, or— Tickwell, Ythmel said slowly. Schedule an emergency meeting with Director Felnash. Priority classification, universe-altering discovery. What should I tell her the discovery is, sir? Tell her that human children's bedtime stories might represent the galaxy's most accurate xenobiological database. 3 levels up, in the executive conference room that had recently been fitted with reinforced windows following several dragon-related visits, Director Felnash was conducting her daily briefing with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for military commanders planning hopeless last stands. Status report on the Dragon integration protocols, she announced to her assembled department heads. Chief Cultural Liaison Peckstar, whose job description had been rewritten 12 times in the last 6 months, consulted his ever-expanding files. We've successfully established communication protocols with 43 Dragon collectives across 17 sectors. They've agreed to stop eating mining vessels that intrude on their territories, provided we implement the new Galactic Courtesy Guidelines, which require formal permission requests before conducting planetary surveys, environmental impact assessments for all terraforming projects, and mandatory consultation with local apex predators before establishing colonial settlements. Director Felnash rubbed her temples with all 4 hands, a gesture that indicated severe Zilithian administrative stress. What about the military integration programs? Military Liaison Kexval, whose recent promotion had come with the unofficial job title of Dragon Relations Specialist, looked distinctly uncomfortable. The Hegemony Council has approved the new Rider Exchange Program. Selected Terra Defense Corps personnel will undergo training in advanced megafauna cooperation techniques. How is that proceeding? Well, Director, we've learned that dragon riding requires approximately 7 years of training, assumes you survive the initial bonding process, and works best if you can handle conversations with beings who remember when your homeworld was still cooling from its formation period. And the military applications? Kexaval's expression suggested someone trying to explain color theory to a blind person. Director, dragons consider our most advanced weapons adorably primitive. Ashkor described our quantum disruptors as cute little sparklers and offered to demonstrate actual destructive capability by rearranging a few moons. We politely declined. What about defensive applications? Dragons don't really do defense, Director. They do comprehensive problem elimination. The distinction is apparently important. Director Felnash was beginning to understand why her predecessor had requested immediate reassignment to a nice, quiet archaeological expedition in the Galactic Rim. Any additional complications? Actually, yes. Tickwell had arrived with her emergency briefing, looking like someone who'd discovered that the universe was far stranger than anyone had suspected. Director, we need to discuss human folklore accuracy rates. I thought we'd established that human mythology was surprisingly reliable. That's just it, Director. It's not surprising anymore. It's systematic. Director Felnash felt reality shift again, the way it had been doing with distressing frequency lately. Explain. Humans have accurate folklore about virtually everything we've classified as extinct, mythological, or impossible. Their cultural preservation methods appear to maintain precise technical specifications for creatures we've never encountered, geographic descriptions of places we've never surveyed, and behavioral analysis of species we've never observed. Chief Cultural Liaison. Pextar's tentacles had gone completely rigid. Are you suggesting that humans somehow possess comprehensive knowledge about galactic fauna distribution patterns, despite having achieved interstellar capability only recently? I'm suggesting, Tickwell replied, with the horrible certainty of someone who'd done the math, that humans might not be a primitive species with overactive imaginations. They might be the only species in the galaxy that actually paid attention to what was already here. The conference room fell silent as approximately 800 years of accumulated academic certainty crumbled into dust. Director, Military Liaison Keksaval said quietly, if human folklore is systematically accurate about galactic fauna, and we've been dismissing it as primitive mythology, then we're not the advanced civilization, Director Felnash finished. We're the newcomers who moved into a neighborhood and spent centuries loudly explaining to the established residents that they don't exist. Gets worse, Director, Tickwell continued with the relentless thoroughness of someone destroying worldviews through proper research methodology. I cross-referenced human folklore with our current expansion plans. We've scheduled terraforming operations on 17 worlds that human mythology specifically describes as sacred to the Ancient Ones. Define Ancient Ones: dragons, phoenixes, world trees, stone giants, sea serpents, sky whales, void hunters, star wolves. Tickwell's list continued for 37 entries. Director Felnash realized that the hegemony had been operating under the galactic equivalent of building shopping centers on graveyards, except the graveyards were occupied, and the residents could reduce planets to component atoms if they got sufficiently annoyed. Recommendations? Immediate suspension of all terraforming operations pending folkloric consultation, Chief Cultural Liaison Peckstar suggested. Establishment of the Department of Human Cultural Accuracy, and possibly some very sincere apologies. To whom? Well, Tickwell said, checking her notes. Based on human folklore, we're sharing the galaxy with approximately 2,000 species we've never officially detected, most of whom are older than our civilizations, significantly more powerful than our militaries, and have been politely ignoring us while we explained why they couldn't possibly exist. Director Felnash contemplated her career trajectory, which had somehow evolved from managing academic publications to preventing interspecies incidents with creatures that could probably restart stellar formation if they put their minds to it. Tickwell, she said finally, draft a memo to all hegemony colonial operations. New policy. Before surveying any system, check human folklore for warnings about ancient guardians, sacred grounds, or places where the old ones sleep. Should I mention why we're implementing folklore consultation protocols? Director Fel-Nash considered her options. She could explain that academic hubris had nearly provoked a diplomatic crisis with apex predators who could treat their civilization like a minor inconvenience. She could detail how their scientific method had managed to miss several thousand species of megafauna through the simple expedient of not believing in them. Or she could save everyone involved a great deal of professional embarrassment. "Tell them," she said, "that we're expanding our research methodologies to include previously underutilized cultural databases. And if they ask why we're suddenly consulting human bedtime stories for scientific accuracy..." Director Fel-Nash looked out her reinforced window at the 3 dragons currently visible in Centaurus orbit, engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation with hegemony traffic control about optimal flight patterns for beings whose wingspan exceeded most space stations. "Tell them that human bedtime stories have better peer review than our xenobiology department." As Tickwell left to draft the memo that would revolutionize galactic expansion policy, Director Fel-Nash reflected on the cosmic irony that had transformed her institution from the galaxy's premier center of learning into a very expensive facility for discovering how thoroughly they'd misunderstood everything. The universe, it seemed, had been patiently waiting for them to ask the right questions. Unfortunately, they'd been too busy providing the wrong answers.